Pro Cannabis Media programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry. And by Artery Pay, easy, cheap, fun, and legal, just like cannabis should be.
Hey, everybody, welcome and thanks for joining us. It's Friday afternoon. We're here in the Green Rush. I'm David Rabinovitz, your weekly host. Jimmy Young, who is often with me, is on assignment on something that we've sent him off to. I can't quite remember what it is. And Kurt Dalton, who typically fills in for Jimmy, is sitting in a car in the pouring rain, waiting to watch his son's 8th grade final football game. I hope they got rafts, Kurt, because it is a wet day out there. So we've got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about cannabis beverages, but there's been a lot of interesting action in the marijuana world this week, especially with a new bill introduced for legalization at the federal level by the Republicans. So this is a big change. And to help us understand it and dive more into it, we've got Michael Correia from NCIA, one of our frequent guests. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Hey, David, how's it going?
Always good when we have you in the house.
I just was thinking we need to do like a Hawaiian t-shirt Friday. And then so I need to get one of those shirts and then we'd be all good to go on the next one.
Well, here, you want mine? I don't think that would be a fun view at this particular point in my life. But anyway, yes, that's because we're going to be talking, like I said, cannabis beverages, and we've got tropical downpours going on here in the fall. So tell us about this new bill and what you're hearing about it, what NCIA has analyzed about it, the pros, the cons.
So right now, a little background, Representative Nancy Mace, a freshman Republican from South Carolina, is going to be introducing a bill next week. On Monday at 2:00, I think she's going to be having a press conference at the Capitol. So it'll be out there. A couple interesting points to be thinking about. We all know that South Carolina isn't leading the country in cannabis reform. She's a freshman. She's a Republican. She's doing this bill because she just personally cares about this issue. This is one of her 3 priority issues that she wants to address. You have to give her props. You have to give her credit for doing this. We've reached out to her office over the course of this year, had good conversations with the office. Looking forward to doing a deeper dive. It's a 120-page bill. NCIA is going to be analyzing the bill. We're in the process of doing it now to talk about our support, if we have concerns with provisions of the bill, and then other sections that we're going to let the congressional office hear about. So we go forward. So it's going to be happening Monday, and stay tuned. But the legislation should be out there. I think it's out there in the public realm for people to see if they're interested, and if they're members of NCIA or they're just interested in, talking about what their concerns are or thoughts. Reach out to us. Let us know.
Cool. So what else can you tell us about Congresswoman Mace?
Well, one, like I mentioned, she's a former military person, veteran. She is a freshman, a Republican, and this is a priority for her, and it's just something personal for her. You have to give her credit for bringing this bill up. People ask, what are the thoughts? Is it going anywhere? What are your thoughts, Mike? Here's just my personal view. Republicans across the board are not really supportive of cannabis reform. You've seen this in the votes. You've seen this in co-sponsorship over the years. They're comfortable with something like SAFE, but when it comes to a legalization bill, you can probably count on one hand how many Republicans have been in support of something like this. Matt Gaetz from Florida, Tom McClintock from California, Dave Joyce from Ohio, Nancy Mace, and that's sort of it. You're talking just a handful of people. And so to me, this bill is not that important in a Democratic Congress, but history shows that elections are not kind to first-term incumbent parties, And so I give it a high probability that the Congress switches and the Republicans are back in control in 12 months. If that's the case, then this bill takes on a bigger priority. And, one of the important issues to us, I've been lobbying for 8 years on this issue. And when the MORE Act came up a year ago, a lot of Republicans came forward and said, this is not a great bill, thumbs down, no. And they never offered an alternative. And there were a lot of Republicans out there who are supportive, I think, of descheduling and reform and pushing this to the states, but some of them weren't willing to go as far as the MORE Act was going. And I think what we needed was a Republican alternative. Here's a potential Republican alternative. Dave Joyce has a bill out there that could be a Republican alternative. And now the time is to put your money where the legislation is. If you are supportive of this, get on one of these bills. Let's see where the support is among Republicans. And then we know going forward how truly bipartisan this could be. If you are an elected official in DC and you are still opposed to cannabis reform at the federal level, you're a dinosaur. You're out of touch with 70% of the Americans, and you need to start stepping aside and get up to date with some of the issues.
Michael, how many red states have adult use programs in place, or even not in place, but they've legalized adult use?
So if I were to go across, and I would say Alaska's one, Maine would be considered a red to / purplish state. Arizona would be considered to me a red state that's tending that direction. But otherwise, everything else tends to be the blue states. And when you had 70% of Florida go, you had Mississippi talk about some medical, Florida talking about medical. There's comfort on medical. So you see red states who are pretty comfortable going medical. You saw it with South Dakota. South Dakota at the same time went adult use, but the legislature and the governor are trying to stop that. Montana, sort of the same thing. So most of these states tend to be blue, not a lot of red, but you're starting to see that change, and you're starting to see states catch up with public opinion. It hasn't filtered back to DC yet. It hasn't filtered back to DC with federal officials, but you're seeing the states go far in front of where the public is.
I give her great kudos, because this is like the old world of politics. Not that when you get older, you like to talk about the older style of politics, but I do remember when the politicians worked on what their issues were, and they either liked the issues or they didn't like the issues. And it wasn't so much, if the other side is pushing the issue, then we're against it, right?
Oh, yeah. And you see that now. You see that now in DC. Just the fact that if something has a D next to its name, every Republican is going to say, I don't want to be part of it. And the same thing with an R next to its name. No one wants to be part of it, versus the only way, like people who talk, I've been in politics almost 30 years. I've been doing cannabis reform for 8 years. I think I know politics. I worked on Capitol Hill for about a dozen years. It's just show me the numbers and get me to the numbers. And the numbers are, 218 in the House, 60 in the Senate, and the president. And trying to get there, especially on cannabis reform, it's going to have to be bipartisan, because I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where the Senate has 60 senators on one side or the other, and they're going to need to cross over. Cannabis on the House side, on medical, on banking, has definitely been bipartisan. But on the adult use, that's where there's a little disagreement on how far we go on the reform side.
Well, you look at the size of the crop, and I'm very tuned in on the data, but this has been a real busy week for me, so I've only been skimming articles. But I've seen 2 articles that are talking about the size nationally of the marijuana crop, and I think it's now the 3rd or 4th largest crop in the U.S. by value.
So I remember, and my data is not up to date, but I remember at one time them saying that the biggest would be beer, and then it would be wine, and it would be cannabis. So to talk about how large the industry would be, I mean, we're talking, I've seen anywhere from 30 to 50 to $75 billion. So I see the potential being enormous. I see the market being enormous. And so, we need to catch up. The voters are there, the public's there, but the politicians are still not there. And we need to get this out. We can't have the illicit market maintaining half of the numbers of this industry. We got to get this out. Got to get it behind a tax and regulated counter.
Cool. So obviously, it doesn't look like this bill is going to get much traction. right?
So here's the thing. I think it's great that she introduced the bill. I have to go through it section by section, and NCIA will do that. We're probably going to go through it section by section and analyze any provisions we don't like in the bill. One of the great provisions is there's an excise tax at 3.75%, which is amazing because it is very low. When you compare it to the Schumer bill, the Wyden bill, the Booker bill, some of these other legalization bills that are at 15, 20, 25% that are tax prohibitive for this industry, seeing something that low is great. That's a good start. The bill pushes a lot of the regulatory issues over to the states. We need to make sure the language works and that's actually workable. So there's a lot of sections in here we got to go over and actually see in practicality, how it rolls out, how it works.
Yep. Trying to think of the name of the bill, even the initials, the current one, Schumer and Booker.
Oh, the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act, KO. Right. We call it KOA. Everyone calls it the CAO. Who knows?
All I know is you look at that bill, right? And it is probably the worst thought out piece of legislation to come down the pike in a long time. You would think that it was written by folks who are so out of step. They have no clue what's going on in the industry. Just the high taxes. If at the state level, every operator and consumers decry the high tax rates.
Yeah.
And now, so what are the feds going to do in their bill? Well, we want to increase it even higher. I mean, it was an ill-conceived bill by people that just wanted to throw something out to show they're behind it.
So I totally agree with you. There are a lot of people, in my circle that think that this is the Schumer bill is just a political document. It's actually not a solution. It's not a solution to the cannabis industry. It's not a true legalization bill. It's just a political document that they want to talk about. They want to campaign on, which is sad, but it is what it is. We did an analysis of that bill. And our economist, Bo Whitney, basically said, these tax rates are too high. They're going to punish small businesses. It's going to lead to consolidation, and it's going to hurt American businesses on the international scene. And so that's not something NCIA supports. That's not something anyone who wants cannabis reform should support. You want a bill that allows for a thriving small business entrepreneurship, a lot of equality, diversity, equity in the industry. So that's something we're looking for. We just don't want consolidation. The last thing either of us want are just, cannabis reform to happen and 4 to 5 big companies end up taking over everything. That's not the world we want to live in.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. So in Massachusetts, we have license caps, and we have, and the commission has capped licensees to no more than 3 licenses per license type. Mm-hmm. And for home delivery, it's at 2. So I was having and we have a lot of people who have discussions about brands, and they want to make them, their names are so important. And I keep trying to explain to folks, when you've got 170 to 180 open stores and nobody has more than 3 of them, it's hard to establish any sort of brand in that kind of an environment, right? It'll be interesting to see how the big players fare on a national level, though I understand some of the states have no license caps.
Oh yeah, and it's that, I'm not going to sit here and say that one regulatory scheme is better than the other, because there's pluses and minuses in everyone. You look at something like Oklahoma, which I was reading on yesterday. I think they have 9,000 cultivation facilities, which is just mind blowing for a state that small. You have a low barrier to entry, which is great for small businesses, but at the same time, is it the best economic model? Can people make money off of that? Is it good from a regulatory scheme? I'm not exactly sure. So there's got to be a fine line and a fine point where small business entrepreneurs can thrive, make money. The consumers are protected, and the industry is providing product with the illicit market sort of fading away and dissipating.
So, Michael, I've got a related but not directly on point question for you from Miguel out of the chat. Mm-hmm. And what he'd like to know, and I'm going to give you a little comment right before I have you answer. what's your take on the judicial group that said Biden can legalize it with a pen? And he's talking about that 5-page document that I've been carrying around since I printed it out about a week ago, have not gotten past the first page. And it looks like it's now from the 1940s because I've bent it, rolled it, every place I go, it goes with me now.
Yeah. So I'm not even going to pretend to be an expert on what the president can and can't do, but I defer. The Brookings Institution, John Hudak, is an expert on this, and he has basically written a paper on exactly this issue. And one of the things he mentioned is the president, Bernie Sanders mentioned this on the campaign trail, that as president, he would legalize cannabis. They don't have the power to do this arbitrarily. What the president can do is point the administration in a direction to studying this issue and coming to a conclusion that maybe they could possibly start legalizing and descheduling. But this is such a big issue. Both, President Obama wanted to do this. He thought it was up to Congress. He thought it was up to Congress that if legalization was going to happen, it was going to come through Congress. It wasn't going to come through the administration. And so, no, I don't believe a president can arbitrarily do this. I don't think Biden can, but he can start the process, and he can sure as heck be a lot more supportive of this issue and start telling his administration officials what they can be doing or not to support the issue. But I highly recommend everyone who's listening go to Brookings Institution, John Hudak. He's written a paper just on this, on the process of what would be needed.
Okay. Now, if you're in the chat, I just posted the document that Miguel was talking about. It's the Congressional Research Service legal sidebar from November 2nd of this year. Does the president have the power to legalize marijuana? So as you can see, you can see all the twists in the document. I really can't hold it up well, but any place I go now, this goes with me until I find the time to finish reading it.
No, I'm gonna check that out and see which direction they've taken. And as far as I know, I'm just going with what I've known before, that the president can't do it by himself, but he can make the process easier and start the process of.
Right. My understanding all along had been that the power of scheduling rests with the attorney general, because back when Nixon was arguing with Congress about it, Nixon, and I think it was the Senate or the House, won out that it was a criminal justice issue, not a public health issue, which is why the power of scheduling does not rest with the Department of Health and Human Services. But there's obviously a process, and it's always nice to say with the swipe of a pen. And can the attorney general do something like that? Yeah, but there still is a process they have to follow.
Yeah, and I think a lot of politicians, they want to, it's easy to know that, hey, vote for me if I'm president, I'll get this done. Okay, then you get elected president, maybe you can't do something like that. So it's good. I pause whenever a politician running for president says they're willing to do something. I take it with a grain of salt. Been around politics too long.
This is not a political show, but I got to read this comment. We all know the president doesn't even have the power to put on his own shoes.
Hey, I just want to make sure everyone, before we go, at 2:00, Nancy Mace is having this press conference, 2 p.m. Eastern time. It's at the Capitol. Probably if you go to her website, you can see the information on there for your listeners if they're interested, or even, if you want to go check it out. I'll be listening. I'll probably actually be there. It'll be good to get out and then see the event in person, see what type of response there is. But just so everyone knows, that's what's going on.
Cool. Well, Michael, as always, thank you. It's always great to have you on. You're always very informative. I think we're coming up on 4:20, which is our typical first break of the show. So everybody stick with us. Don't go away. We're going to be back in a few minutes, and we're taking our typical 4:20 break in respect of Jimmy Young.
Hey.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm going to sit down in my rented car. I'm going to jam it into drive. I'm going to head on out and play at WSCA with Seun. I'm glad I'm alive. We're going to lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Every night and day, we're going to lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God.
So I think there's one very important difference between me and most of my team members and other cannabis accounting firms, especially outsourced cannabis accounting firms. With a lot of the other firms, you're going to find bookkeepers or folks that were accountants for their entire career, but they were junior accountants. I've spent most of my career alongside CFOs at public companies, companies with thousands of employees, public companies. So much of my career wasn't spent in the debits and credits. It was spent with the CFO, CEO, COO of large public companies, working on strategy, working on planning and big initiatives, working on projects such as mergers and integrations. So that high level experience, along with being able to do the debits and credits and having members of my team that also have fairly senior experience, and also members of the team that are junior and can do the bookkeeping at a little bit lower cost than some of the people with the experience, gives our clients a much broader depth of experience than a lot of the other firms, where you're hiring someone that is just a bookkeeper and can't help with the strategy side of it, or someone that's been an executive for a long time and can only help with the strategy but can't help with the hands-on.
Difference is building a solution for that individual, not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the costs low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. We're here on Friday afternoon in the Green Rush. I'm David Rabinovitz, your host. We do this every Friday afternoon and talk about the business of cannabis. We always rope in a great group of panelists and people who really know the business. And right now I'm joined by Jason Reposa. Jason has got a great background and a great story. He started off in Massachusetts, moved to New York, very successful in the tech space, came back to Massachusetts, and then decided he was going to go into a very, very simple plant business. And then he was going to do something even more easy and convert it into a beverage. So he's got a great story. Jason, thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me, David.
So,
I'm glad to be here again.
Your background and the path you took and what actually got you back into cannabis. And then once you got back in, what you've had to go through to get to where you are with those funky white glasses.
Yeah, thanks. So basically, I've had nothing. There's turmoil wherever you look. It's chaos. It's the industry you think you're gonna cruise through because of it's a plan. It's so simple, right? It's just very straightforward. But in fact, it is extremely, extremely difficult, as many people who have been in my position will tell you. But basically, no, I come from a tech background. So I've always been into innovation and technology and trying to create beautiful, wonderful, innovative things. And I'm always tinkering with stuff, right? And that's how I kind of stumbled across this, was I was just tinkering. But basically, the short of it, my story is that I was climbing I was doing a Dinka trail in Peru. And as I was climbing, I was, running up this mountain as fast as I could. And then at the end of the next day, when I woke up, my jaw closed and I couldn't open my mouth. And I panicked. I was like, what do I do? Right. And so I go back to the States, go back home. I'm seeing doctors and all these other things. And like many people in the situation where you're seeing a lot of doctors, but not seeing many results, I turned to cannabis. And then, I haven't used cannabis for 20 years at that point. And so I was like, let me just see if this works. And so it turns out it actually had a miraculous benefit for me. Again, sample size of 1. I'm not saying this has crazy medical benefits that's going to unlock your jaw the next day. But through the use of cannabis and some practitioners, I was able to free up my jaw, and to the point where I'm a normal person again. At least I kind of treat myself or think of myself as a normal person.
That's good. So, so what prompted you to decide to start Goodfields? Oh,
yeah,
hold that bottle up. You're not even fully in business yet. Look at all the swag.
Well, I've been actually tempering the team a little bit. My team is already ready to go pop-ups and all these field marketing exercises, and we go to events all the time. We were just in the CW Expo. We saw Jimmy there. We chatted it up a bit there. So we were on to all these new, venues and looking forward to like, getting in there when we're live in the market, which should be shortly. We have a PPLI inspection on Tuesday, so we're right around the corner. We'll see what happens with December's agenda meeting, but hopefully we'll be launched in end of this year or early next year.
No, that's great. I'm going to take a quick moment to introduce David Durkee, who's joining us. David's with Quicksilver Scientific. David, tell us a little bit about yourself and what Quicksilver does.
Hi, great to join you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Loud and clear.
No, great to join. Quicksilver is a dietary supplements company in Boulder, Colorado, and we're using our technology from our supplements business in the cannabis space to improve efficacy, bioavailability, onset, that type of stuff.
Cool. And are you folks, are you active in the beverage side of the business?
Yeah, so we have two fairly large beverage customers, one of which is Trust Beverages in the US and Canada, which is a joint venture between Molson Coors and Hexo that you may have heard of. And so they're in THC and CBD beverages. And we have a couple of other customers as well, wherein we make ingredients and do sort of formulation and development services for those companies to get them to market quickly with really killer products.
Cool. And Arthur, thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about ECS Brands.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So ECS Brands, we have really started as an ingredient supply company for the past 3 years, really just focusing on innovation with, different like processing techniques and innovation around, refinement, remediation, developing different, extracts with different cannabinoid profiles, really, putting an emphasis on just kind of diversifying the ingredient selection and optionality with, products. So essentially to, take a standard kind of common product on the market, but differentiate it from, a cannabinoid profile and really kind of getting into exploring the science of, different minor cannabinoids, different ratios, different, strains and cultivars. So that's kind of been like a primary focus for, that really got us started and really kind of established ourselves as a, supplier and kind of innovator. And then, we really kind of grew into exploring more advanced technology and IP development with bioavailability and kind of, learning more about our extracts. We did a clinical trial earlier this year with one of our extracts that was just absolutely incredible. The results and the learning experience was just like completely, not like nothing's been more, I guess, kind of value building and, experience building with that whole process. And the results were fascinating. We've developed a lot of different water soluble technologies. We kind of got an early start and have a really strong science team around just having solutions for different methods of solubilizing oils and cannabinoid extracts. So over the past 3 years, we've first expanded our kind of standard oil and ingredient portfolio. And we've always taken kind of like a consumer approach, as I mentioned, with like basically taking like a standard tincture and enabling a brand to differentiate themselves and to have kind of an ability to stand out in kind of an oversaturated category, as well as industry with CBD, but then further evolving to to format and really think about different products, right? Like we're brand minded, we're consumer product minded. So all of our innovation has kind of been with that approach. So like, there's manufacturers that just don't, like we want to encourage brands to create great products and effective products and quality products. And, like I started in the industry back in 2014. So I've kind of seen the whole, CBD side evolve. My first kilo of isolate I sold for $50,000 in 2015, and it was not a quality isolate. It was big chunky yellow crystals, but it just didn't exist. And like the consumer base and the demographic back then was just wildly different. Nobody really knew what CBD was. It was primarily cancer and epilepsy patients, and and that evolution of understanding kind of like back then, it was like, okay, we had to accept that we needed to become experts, learn about everything that we could. It was a lot slower of a industry, but we needed to become educators, really, to kind of get the word out there, educate people what CBD was. Now everybody knows what it is, and that's really kind of the backbone of ECS is that next step, that next phase. We want to promote awareness and really kind of get people to realize the importance of the endocannabinoid system, as opposed to just kind of the buzzword of CBD. And so with like being consumer product minded and innovation oriented, we've developed, like, we think about manufacturers, a lot of, like, for example, a lot of manufacturers will just stick with CBD isolate because it's easy to understand, right? A kilo is a kilo of CBD. The weight equals the active. When you get into some of these, full spectrum, whole plant types of extracts, which are ultimately going to provide a much more effective product and quality product, it's tough. Like I've seen kind of the transition and the challenges that manufacturers have just understanding that simple concept of, you have, like, you put it on a scale, but there's only 60% cannabinoids because 60% CBD, therefore it's only 600,000 milligrams. That simple concept and having some variability from one batch to the other, like, that has challenged people. The usability of the oil, stuff like that, and so, like, when it comes to just some of, like, the physical characteristics, some of the like, whether there's THC, there's the kind of regional and international differences of regulatory framework with can a product have CBN in it in the UK. So we've developed this like whole portfolio to really cater to those different elements. If it's a vape product, like, it can't crystallize in the cartridge, stuff like that. So we've created, just over the years, kind of a very large portfolio, and then incorporating our water soluble technologies, our portfolio of ingredients, because, like, we can do water soluble liquid, water soluble powder. So it's like we have three material formats for every profile that we've developed, which has kind of created, like, I've gotten comments in the past that we're like the Walmart for cannabinoids, because we think about all the different products that and the features that people want or people need, or that are based on compliance or preference, and so it's most of what we've done for the past 3 years. We're just starting to kind of finalize some of our own brands and some of our own products, all of which are evolved from kind of the status quo of the industry, I would say, because really it's been 3 years of kind of focusing on technology, because I think that's ultimately where the future is. Oh, you're on mute. Unless my audio is just.
No, that was me. Thank
there
you.
we go.
We have a lot of dogs here, and somebody came downstairs in the kitchen, and East Coast time, we're getting close to feeding time, so it sounded like a frenzy in there for a few moments. So I muted. Jason, unmute. I got a question for you. You may want to.
Yeah, shoot.
So walk us through how you formulated your product. Tell us a little bit about the product, how you formulated it, and what some of the challenges.
Yeah, so basically, Arthur, I love ingredients companies. They are so crucial to this industry because our team is focused on brand. Our focus is on marketing and branding and making sure we can create really, really great products. But without ingredients companies, we can't create these beautiful, wonderful products, right? Mm-hmm. So the way we formulated was that it started with, and again, I'm an engineer. I reverse engineered formulas across, the market space in particular in Massachusetts, right? So in Massachusetts, there was only one beverage on the market when I started my endeavor. And so I reverse engineered it, trying to figure out, and they're using Correia extract, like Q Natural from Ingredion. They're like all these interesting things. And I was like, oh, that's how you make it water compatible. It's like making salad dressing. This is so neat. Like you take an emulsifier and in oil and water, then all of a sudden mix, and you can have a balsamic vinegar and they won't mix, or you can have a creamy vinaigrette and it will mix, like a ranch or something like that, right? Yep. And so that's the underlying part of what we have to explain to a lot of people. And Arthur, you were talking about, for instance, education, right? There's still more education, especially in the beverage world, right? As you probably have experienced, and you also, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. It says Durkee on the screen.
Oh, David.
So David, it's the same thing. It's like education of the consumer, right? Because beverages are a new format for a lot of people. So how do you get people to understand it? Like basically now you can drink a cannabis oil, right? So anyways, long story short, looking at different ingredients, reverse engineering their formulas, and then coming to the point where we're able to figure out how to make it fast acting at that point, right? That was the next evolution. Is like a lot of the products in the very early days were just like, how do I get cannabis oil into water? The next step was, how do you actually make it faster, right? Fast acting. So it's not like a traditional edible or a MIP like we call it in the Massachusetts market. But basically that's all it started. It was reverse engineering, trying to figure out what ingredients people were using and then trying to do it your own special way, right? And we've used lots of off-the-shelf material. We've created our own proprietary blend also to make it water compatible. At the end of the day, the technology exists, and it exists very much in pharma, right? There's formulations out there now. You can literally just drop in the cannabis oil into a special blend, which I'm not going to name, and then you just mix it and it's nano. It's incredible, like the amount of innovation that's happening right now. And so since we've had our pulse on that since the beginning of the journey for us in the Massachusetts market, again, this probably already exists in California, and they're all 10 years ahead of us and all that business. But since we're so hyper-focused on Massachusetts, we're really focused on branding, marketing, distribution, sales. Like that's what's going to make a successful company in Massachusetts, because we still are in this walled garden without federal legality, right? Branding, marketing, distribution, sales, but just really focusing on the best flavor profiles, the best design, like making sure that when people take our beverage and drink it, they just get the experience that we're looking for.
Yep. Yeah, experience is key.
What's the experience that you're looking for, Jason?
Well, for us, it's, we're low dose fast acting, right? Those are kind of like two of the pillars that we're working towards. And so for us, we're really focused on, and we're in glass bottles, right? So we feel that like glass just gives you kind of that cleaner taste and that cleaner feeling when you're drinking it. And it is a more, I don't want to say luxury product, but it's also not cheap in the Massachusetts market either. So we wanted to make it extra special for people to consume it. And so we're not in a can today, at least, but maybe in the future it might happen. But we find that, glass is kind of the experience we're looking for. But at the end of the day, we just want to make products that make people feel good. That's why we're called Good Feels.
Okay, that makes plenty of sense. What what's dosage per can is what, 5 milligrams?
On ours, no. So we chose, it's 5 milligrams total.
Right. Okay.
So we're low dose. So we're 3 milligrams THC, 2 milligrams of CBD. And the reason why is through our research and through our own testing, we found that 3 and 2 just hit nicely, because you're not trying to get somebody to the moon on the first drink, right? We're trying to get people to like pace themselves. We're not going after the traditional user necessarily. We're looking at the people who are in more mass market, kind of casual or kind of curious, that are just coming into the market and being like, well, what's easy for me, right? How am I going to get started here? But everything we have in common here, David and Arthur, is basically the same, which is a drink. It's easy. You don't have to think about, oh, do I have to grind it first and roll it up and put it in a pipe? Like, there's no thinking. You crack it open, you drink it. There's no thinking involved. And that's kind of why we are super, super interested in creating more beverages in that category.
Mm-hmm.
And David, jump in a little bit. So you're tell us how you're taking the supplement knowledge you have and converting that into the beverage business.
Sure. No, I think it piggybacks really nicely on the themes that have been brought up, because Quicksilver has developed a number of technologies. I've developed a number of technologies since I joined that are in that sort of rapid absorption, fast acting space, because that's what we do in our mainline supplements business, whether it's CBD, traditional Chinese medicine, vitamins, minerals. We have a whole line of supplements, but the important thing is these things are not absorbed particularly well. And our technology is very transferable to the THC CBD space. And another interesting thing really is we had Quicksilver started as a metals toxicity company about 15 years ago. We have a lab and a clinic at our facility in Boulder, where people would come in and get their blood drawn for, I have high mercury or arsenic or something like that. Well, that's an advantage in the cannabis and CBD space too, because we've repurposed that lab to do consumer trials. We give people, formulations that we've done with partners, be it CBD, THC, et cetera. We'll take their blood, we'll actually measure the uptake of actives into their blood. And we're able to show with our technology that it's, superior to the control, superior to the competitor or whatever. And being in Colorado, which is one of the first licensed states in the US, we can do THC and a bunch of interesting things as well to really demonstrate the efficacy of our technology. And, it's been, leveraging a huge amount of knowledge from Quicksilver, but also my personal experience. I've been in the food industry since the mid 90s. I was actually working for a company that was contracted by Procter & Gamble to re-engineer the original oil and water beverage, which was Sunny Delight. It was an orange oil and water beverage. And it's funny because the days of Sunny Delight, I think, have kind of come and gone a little bit. But that idea of I need to get this very, flavorful or potent oil into a beverage so people can enjoy it is still very relevant. So especially in this space. So, we're taking a lot of food and pharma technology to develop a full portfolio of solutions for folks to really get into the space quickly.
So where do you see the beverage business going for cannabis? Is this going to be a major segment? Is it going to outpace flower, overtake edibles? Because right now
I think it's an evolution. Like I said, Colorado is one of the oldest licensed markets in the U.S. And frankly, North America. And we've seen in our local market, first it was flower, then it was vape. Now it's kind of edibles is the key market driver. And I think beverages is on the horizon as a subset of edibles. As you guys said, it's people know how to use it. You crack it open and drink it. That's a key factor. And there's no food matrix to get in the way with a beverage. It's all, usually mostly water 90+% water, and that digests quickly. It gets out of the way. And so you get that consistent experience more so than you do with other edibles. So I think it's going to take a while for there to be general acceptance of beverages like there is in the beverage alcohol category. But the other thing to keep in mind is the consistency and complexity of beverage making. I mean, if you think about major beverage companies, they're usually extremely large, well capitalized, having a very complex manufacturing and distribution footprint, which doesn't lend itself well to the current legislation and state to state legality, but also is necessary. I used to work at Coors Brewing here in Colorado as well. And, turning out a consistent product is extremely challenging, with a alcoholic beverage and natural product like that. And so the cannabis beverage world needs to catch up in some regards to that consistency and quality. And then I think, it'll be a time where, you need to drive awareness and you need to get people on board with having a cannabis beverage. And frankly, regulations too. Having these things in bars, I think would be a huge, a very big deal. But you got to go to a dispensary and then probably have it at your house today. And that's how it works. So there's several things that I think need to happen, but there's no fundamental reason that this couldn't be on par with the Bev Alc category, because the other thing too is, no hangover. That's a nice benefit. Usually lower calories. That's a great benefit. I think people will find out these things along the way.
How fast do you see adoption taking place? And I'll throw this out to all three of you. Is this going to be, is it going to ramp up very quickly, or it's going to continue on a slow, gradual climb?
Just to piggyback on what I just said, I think it'll be gradual, and I think it'll be mainly driven by a couple of things. The regulations and availability of getting these in more places, I think, would be one. And the other is probably brands and brand awareness. You guys were talking about building brands earlier. That's what people gravitate to in the beverage business. And once you have a recognizable brand that, is consistent and people are coming back to, that'll drive a lot of that. So I think that's two things that are in the works. And when, a major brand or a national brand comes on the scene, and when these are available in more places, that's when I think you'll see a real serious uptick in these beverages.
Arthur, how big of how important is beverages to your current supply business?
It's actually very important, and it's growing pretty quickly. We've been fortunate to have partnered with Killcliff from day one. We've exclusively been supplying and assisting with formulation and flavor development and whatnot from the very get-go, which has been a little over 2 years now, I think. And here's actually the newest flavor, the Killer Cliffsicle, which is absolutely delicious, and it's 25 milligrams of CBD, water soluble, and 125 milligrams of caffeine. And so they've been an incredible partner. That's been just a very enjoyable journey. About a year ago, they brought Joe Rogan in as an owner, as a partner of the company, which has really boosted their traction and their popularity and distribution and overall manufacturing volume, which has been great. And they're great partners. We've been doing a number of new innovations with kind of beverage, different types of beverage solutions. So there's ready to drink beverages, obviously. And we do a lot of custom powder, water soluble powder development and flavor development for powders. So one of our in-house brands with Hemp Fuel, which is a sports performance nutrition brand that we literally just launched the products at MJ BizCon, which was only a few weeks ago. products that we've been working on for a while. And so we have, a pre-workout, a hydration, a recovery, and they're very kind of robust with, functional ingredients, whether it's caffeine or, turmeric powder and, other kind of wellness and performance enhancing types of, ingredients for the overall formula. And the flavor development with that is, took some time, and, there's definitely some inherent challenges with, getting the flavor right, but that's all kind of, speaking to Jason's, focus that he mentioned, like flavor and that experience is super important, because you can have the greatest product or the greatest beverage ever, but if it doesn't taste good, people are not gonna buy it. They're not gonna use it. Unfortunately, cannabinoids are not to the level of cough syrup where, you just kind of plug your nose and, just accept the terrible flavor. It's got to be enjoyable. You have to really focus on, the consumer experience, and the data behind it too, is just as valuable with, the mention of absorption into the blood and proving that, and having that data. One of the things that we are fortunate to have as a tool, although we haven't really implemented it too much because it's kind of a foreign concept to a lot of brands, but we have a full sensory lab. We took over, we ended up acquiring the former Dean Foods pilot plant facility here in Broomfield. And the space was, pre-built to have a 10-person sensory lab where we can sort of, influence the taste, and kind of get feedback for the true flavor, where, because light has a big impact on flavor. So if something tastes like strawberry and it's not pink, it tastes different, right? Color has a lot to do with sort of how you interpret the flavor. So we have, red light, blue light, green light, dark light, where we can kind of, get like a true flavor feedback to kind of understand and how to perfect and improve a product. And some of those techniques and kind of product development concepts are not really, like I said, it's kind of a foreign topic for a lot of people in our industry, because I think it's just an evolutionary process where big beverage companies, Dean Foods was a kind of a mega conglomerate of dairy products, and once you hit that scale of distribution and manufacturing, the competitive landscape is a lot tighter, and there's all sorts of tiny little packaging improvements and flavor improvements that if you can kind of increase the success of a product or the margin by 1% or the popularity by 1%, it's significant. So I think we're in an industry that's still very young, obviously, but the evolutionary steps, which also kind of take in some of the functionality, the technology, the clinical evidence, stability, that's for me, and what we kind of experienced, and something that we've been working on for a while, is that stability of water soluble, water dispersible cannabinoids, and getting the particles small enough so that they remain in suspended in solution. And with particularly with canned beverages, the inner the food grade lining that's in the inside causes a big challenge for a lot of brands, because the oil has a attraction to that material and will actually stick to that inner food grade lining that wraps the inside of the can. And so when it comes to shelf life and testing out and kind of hitting spec after X amount of months, that's been a real challenge. I mean, there's been a lot of news, a lot of kind of, articles talking about how common it is for, like a canned beverage to, to kind of get tested after being on the shelf for, several months. And, the results are that there's no cannabinoids in the product. And, early on, I think a lot of people were like, how is this even possible? And then people realized that the cannabinoids were literally on the inside of the plastic.
Yeah, I think that's really a subset of packaging knowledge in general, because, you see the same thing in plastic, even in glass. I mean, cannabinoids are light sensitive. I see cannabis beverages in clear glass. The industry in general doesn't know packaging. And so you're talking about, one thing, but it's a huge issue that, if you've done beverage work in the Dean Foods of the world or whatever, that's a key thing that you got to figure out. And hopefully the industry is learning from that.
Yeah.
All right. So we're at the top of the hour. We're going to take our 5 o'clock break. Hang in there. Don't go away. We're going to be right back here in the Green Rush.
Pro Cannabis Media programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry. And by Artery Pay, easy, cheap, fun, and legal, just like cannabis should be.
Difference is building a solution for that individual. Not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the costs low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
Hey, thanks for hanging with us. We're back on Friday afternoon, the Green Rush. We do this every Friday, 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to introduce our 2 additional guests that joined us, and we're going to keep the conversation going about cannabis beverages. We've got Aaron Silverstein he's the VP of Production and Business Development with the House of Saka. And Seun, as soon as he gets his audio and his video connected, we're going to introduce him. But Aaron, introduce yourself and tell us about your company and what you do.
Sure. So I'm the VP of Production at House of Saka, as you mentioned, as well as in whatever free time I manage to find, I'm the president of the Cannabis Beverages Association based here in California. So I head up all this production for Saka, which is a cannabis infused wine brand. One of the first to ever do that. And we use exclusively Napa Valley wine that we then dealkalize and infuse with cannabis, which is a fun challenge.
When cannabis, are you talking the THC or the CBD side of it?
So I'm talking the THC market. So we work in the regulated California market and of course working to expand into other states.
So you're putting alcohol and THC together?
We are not. So that would definitely not be legally compliant. I used to work in the wine industry and actually worked a lot on different non-alcoholic wines and helping people produce those.
Got it. Okay.
I ended up falling into cannabis.
Right. I figured that would not be that wouldn't go well with the TTB at this point of trying to.
No, it certainly would not. I don't think we'd go over well with anyone. Generally, also, I would probably not do too well drinking alcohol and cannabis at the same time either.
Yeah. So for the first 30 minutes, we were talking a little bit. Jason is a product manufacturer. And then we've got David and Arthur, who are more on the supplier side. And we're talking about some of the issues with the supplies and that sort of thing. But let's talk. And then Seun's with us. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. But Aaron, tell us a little bit about your products, some of the challenges you've had, customer acceptance, that sort of thing.
I mean, definitely, I think with beverage as a category as a whole, there is a massive challenge right now with customers, I would say, especially in older markets like California, Oregon, or Washington, where we have what we refer to as legacy consumers who just so often they're buying on, it's $1 per milligram kind of a thought process. And beverage, especially in its current form, where you're seeing fast acting nano emulsions, is such a new thing that almost the biggest barrier is education, making people aware of what this actually is, what it offers, and why it's such a nice product. Why is this beverage different from brownie?
And do you run into problems? Do you have issues with separation within the vessel, so that it's kind of like a shake well before using situation, or once it's in there, it is like wine, you don't have to worry about it coming apart?
Once it's in there, you don't need to worry about that, at least over the lifetime of the product. If you're going to do, let's say, a 2-year shelf life, something like that. But that's really a question of how you develop your product. So if I were another brand, it's a question of what kind of emulsification tech am I using, and is that actually compatible with my beverage, as well as how did I package this? Some of the beverage manufacturers I've seen right now in the space aren't necessarily that sophisticated with how they're packaging these beverages. And we're seeing lots of dissolved oxygen pickup, which actually will cause some problems down the road. Depending on what kind of base you're using, it might kind of facilitate some separation, or more commonly, it'll cause a loss of potency, which is a big problem too. Wow. If I'm going to tell you I've got 40 milligrams in here, and then when you actually drink it, you end up only getting 15 out of that. That's a big issue.
Off flavors, I'm guessing, in a wine product. If you've got a bunch of DO in a wine, it's not going to taste good.
Exactly. So coming from the wine industry, I was kind of obsessed with that to start with. But it's been fascinating seeing people in cannabis now actually really starting to pick it up, working with companies like Anton Par, for example, to start having dissolved oxygen meters. And people are starting to care more and put that thought into it. But it's a process as it's developing, for sure.
Yeah, no, that was a key criteria. So nice to meet you. I work for Quicksilver, and we worked with Trust Beverages in Canada. That's a legacy beer operation. So they were focused on dissolved oxygen as well, and their packaging line, I think, does 100. Oh no, I'm sorry, it was way low, like 20 parts per billion in the package, total package oxygen. So yeah, it's extremely important, and you can hit the targets if you're focused on it, obviously.
And that's way, way below what you even need for cannabis, to be honest. So, I mean, just coming in from the wine industry, our standard would usually be 1 ppm or less at bottling. Mm-hmm. So that's, in beer, you're working with a 50th of that. Mm-hmm. Cannabis, I think, is probably more like wine. You're going to be pretty safe at those levels, but it does help quality to be able to control it and keep it even lower, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to take a quick minute. I want to introduce Seun. Seun, I'm not going to even try the last name. Seun and I finally met face-to-face today, had lunch together with Blake Mensing, another close friend in the cannabis area. Seun, while Seun is not directly in the beverage space, he's got an interesting story, and he understands this a bit. So Seun, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about Elevate and what you've done, how you've started on the West Coast and got over to the East Coast.
Hey, David, thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure to have breakfast with you and Blake earlier today. My name is Seun Adedeji. I'm the founder and CEO of Elevate Cannabis. I'm originally from Lagos, Nigeria, and I migrated to the United States at a really early age. I was affected by cannabis. I was a kid that was selling candy and gum at a really early age because we didn't have a lot and our home was not holistic. So I was always an entrepreneur as a child. I upgraded from selling candy and gum to cannabis, and I got arrested at a really early age for being an entrepreneur, way too advanced for my age. And at that point, I progressed, moved to Texas, lived with my auntie. I learned from my mistakes, and forward now, we're a multi-state operator. I got married. I have a 5-year-old beautiful daughter that, takes a lot of my time outside of being an Elevate Cannabis CEO. I'm also like a gymnastics dad and a dance dad. So that's been really great and an interesting factor in my life. And just moving forward, we are, once again, a multi-state operator. Opened my shop in Eugene, Oregon. I slept in my shop for a year. We were undercapitalized. I used $50,000, a combination of my credit card and life savings, to get my business off the ground in Eugene, Oregon. When you talk about bootstrapping, we bootstrapped at a mastery level. And during this point, I was young. I became the youngest minority to open a retail cannabis shop in the United States, and I became the youngest multi-state operator. I'm also on the board of NCIA. We do a lot of policy work and lobbying in different states to make sure the cannabis legalization has a fair share of people that have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. I think that's why me and Blake get along so well. We kind of see that in David meeting him, see that visions too, to help more minorities that have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. That being said, it is such an honor to be here, and thank you for having me, David.
Great, good to have you in. So, Jason, how many flavors are you planning on manufacturing, and how do you decide? How do you get the flavors right?
Man, we tried probably over 50, maybe 60 different combinations, various flavors from different flavor houses. We've had flavors designed for us. We've also internally designed a lot of flavors. We basically just test, and I think to a lot of the points we were talking about before, whether it's dissolved oxygen, ppm levels, et cetera, a lot of the science is out on this, right? So you have to just test to figure out what works, what doesn't work. And one thing we don't have a lot of in the cannabis industry is time, right? Because there's a competitive edge to that. There's a lot of people coming up in the beverage world now, even though I've been doing it for a minute. I'm still young in this game, but at the same time, it's one of those situations where you just have to test everything. And so with the team we have, we're at 7 employees now. And we probably tested and sampled and surveyed 200 to 300 people. We've given out over 1,000 samples at this point to people. So we just kept on testing basically. But right now we're launching with 4 flavors. So I think I could announce the flavors. I think they've already been announced, but basically we're sparkling seltzer. So the cannabis beverage market right now is very much seltzer or soda in Massachusetts. And we're on the seltzer side because we're more of a wellness impact. But we have grapefruit, blood orange, raspberry apple, and black cherry. And those came as the best flavors that we put together. They also happen to be some of the most popular flavors in seltzer in general. Like when I go to the store, I get black cherry seltzer myself, right? So, and one of the things I said in the YouTube comments is that one of the biggest problems you have with a lot of this technology when you're trying to make it at least the fast acting component of it is the taste, and taste is everything for people. And so our approach is always to make it the absolute cleanest, best tasting beverage we can.
Cool. I was just looking in the chat, so my mind was
yeah.
off.
Sorry, I pointed out the chat person because chat is like flowing, and I'm like in it. I'm like typing again, in there with them because it's a lot of fun talking to the people in there.
How big? I should call on somebody for this, but let me say, are you folks carrying beverages in any of your stores right now?
David, that is not my expertise. We have an intake manager that really deals with that component of our of the side of things. I believe we do. I know for sure in Oregon we carry beverage. I know that for sure. Recently, I think we do in the state of Massachusetts. I don't have a definitive answer, and I don't want to lie to you, David. So, yeah.
So one of our leading investment firms in the state, one of their principals made a comment to me some months ago that any of the dispensaries that they invest in now, they have built-in coolers up front in the store because they think that the beverage market is going to be that big and that important. Where do you think beverage 3 years from now? Like today, just about 50% of all the products sold in Massachusetts is raw flour. Traveling right behind that, probably in the 15 to 20% range, are pre-rolls. So the consumption of flour looks like it's 70% of the market, and everything else falls into the other 30%. Where do you see beverages? Aaron, let's start with you. Where do you see beverages in 3 to 5 years?
That is a really good question. I do believe it's going to be massive. I would say in a state like Massachusetts, I would be expecting somewhere north of 15% of the market in the next 3 to 5 years. People might think that's a bit high, but it's the track where this is going. The growth in California has been substantial. But what's fascinating is California has all this legacy infrastructure where all these stores, the distribution, everything wasn't built out for beverage. They completely ignored it. And now people are trying to figure it out and they're struggling. It's a struggle for me to try and get beverages from one place to all the dispensaries I need to deliver to because it's too heavy and people don't want to carry it. But Massachusetts, exactly like you're saying, they're putting those fridges in there for display now. They're going to be able to sell things that are cold and ready to drink in that fashion. And they're going to have the storage space for it. So I think that's going to actually accelerate way beyond what we're seeing in states where recs have been there for a longer period of time.
Just a side point on that one though, Aaron, that's completely accurate with the fridges. And if anybody is a dispensary listening, we will put a fridge right in front because cold is sold. That's actually something I learned on Green Rush Live when I was on a few months ago. Cold is sold. So anything RTD, if it's cold, people are going to buy it, right?
And taking a cue from the mainstream market, right? I mean, you go to the liquor store, the beer's cold. You know, the soda that people buy at the supermarket by the cash register, that's cold. I mean, this is a known fact in the beverage industry. So the fact that Massachusetts is in that way, I think that's a great sign for RTD in that state.
And Seun, you do actually have beverages. You have my buddy Adam Terry's can trip there. I know you do. And you probably also have Levia because they're the two biggest ones right now that are launched. But can trip, those are my boys, Adam Terry and Dylan. They're really good guys. Also, but keep in mind, Levia does a fantastic job as well. And again, I'm speaking to the Massachusetts market. And I know this is a national program, David, but like I'm always repping Massachusetts brands. And Levia are doing fantastic distribution, sales. They nailed it on day one. They're the #1 beverage in the nation right now. And it's only operate in Massachusetts. That can tell you the scale of where we're going to eventually end up going at this point.
Hey, Jason, thank you so much for your feedback and informing me about, what our stores do carry. So thank you for that. And I had the pleasure to meet some of the owners. Just clicked to me. And yes, thank you for that. I appreciate that, Jason.
No problem.
So Jason, how do you infuse the flavors into your beverage? I'm just pulling one of the questions that was out of the chat. They're interested in some of the different methods of infusion, flavor infusion.
So the flavors they're all natural flavors. They're, so basically the infusion process is really more for the THC and CBD. The cannabinoids are the hardest part. Most natural flavors usually come with a carrier like a PG or ethyl alcohol or something like that, which is a polar solvent. And so it goes into water immediately. You can just take this off the shelf, kind of like, it wouldn't be an essential oil, but it's a natural flavor, which again has been paired with a carrier in order to get it to become water soluble in that case. So it goes right in.
David, anything that you might add in on that?
Oh yeah, flavor is a challenge onto its own, but it's not the same type of challenge as the cannabinoids, as Jason was saying. There's a lot of technology around cannabinoids and getting them in. But the good thing about the food industry is there's a lot of flavor companies that have done a really great job at getting flavors infused into beverages for, decades. And now more so than when I first started doing this, 3-4 years ago, those flavor companies might actually work with you. So that's good too. You're seeing increasingly sophisticated flavor companies really come in, see this as a growth opportunity and work with cannabis companies to make that, black cherry seltzer or whatever it is, just as good as the other stuff that's on the market. So that's been really good. A few years ago, that was a challenge. You kind of had to DIY it almost. Because or work at a one step remove from a flavor company, but now increasingly, and I've worked with some really great flavorists. We have a great flavorist on our team here. Having that knowledge where they can taste that and say, oh, it needs a little more of this one specific compound. I can't do that. And getting access to that kind of expertise and everything is just definitely the way to go in beverage development.
Yeah, it's an absolute art. And to your point, David, 100%. I am also bootstrapped, right? Not as extreme as Seun's case, but like we're bootstrapped too. And for these flavor companies just to respond to my emails and say, yeah, we'll give you some samples is fantastic. There is one caveat to that though, because sometimes when I'm like, hey, can I get a sample? They'll send me a sample and they'll say, all right, I'll be like, oh, what's your MOQ, right? How much can I order at a minimum because I'm small? And they're like, oh yeah, 1 metric ton. And I'm like, I can't quite commit to that yet.
Yeah.
I hope to be in that situation soon, but not quite yet.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another one too, that the bigger guys, they might work with you, but then, you got to fit into their footprint. But increasingly the bigger guys are working with distributors or, maybe a company that they acquired to get that lower MOQ in there. I worked with a customer where, the minimum order quantity was 70 pounds, which is a lot of flavor. Don't get me wrong, but it's not a metric ton either. So yeah, those things are definitely coming into rationalization in the space a little bit.
So, Aaron, how many members do you have in the Cannabis Beverage Association?
Well, right now, I'd say we're about 30 members. That seems to be rapidly growing. I was just spending this week at the Cannabis Drinks Expo in San Francisco. So quite a lot of brands I was chatting with there. I feel like we're hitting a critical mass right now, and people are realizing the need for a lot of advocacy efforts to make sure that as states are doing these regulations, they take beverage into consideration.
Are your members all product manufacturers or suppliers, or do you have people who are outside the industry, like, for example, major drink companies that want to monitor what's going on so they can be ready for when legalization comes in?
We have some discussions going with major drink companies, but they haven't joined quite yet. But we do have a diverse membership. We've got brands. We have licensed manufacturers. We do have, nano emulsion vendors. There are some flavor companies that have joined. Really anyone interested in that entire supply chain.
Got it. Now I know you're in California, so I'm sure you've got a high concentration in California, but do you have members? I'm trying to just get a sense of where the beverage companies that are in your group are located. West Coast, Central, East Coast, all
right
over?
Now, most are West Coast, but I think my goal is by the end of 2022 to actually get that roughly evened out. I think everyone's doing a great job of growing, launching brands there, and the interest in this category just keeps growing. And the goal is not just to represent California, but be a voice for the entire nation.
Sure. Jason, what's it cost to set up an operation to make cannabis infused drinks?
That is a giant bottleneck. So the problem with that is that you can't just, take some distillate oil and put it in a cart and then ship it off with some nice pretty packaging. There's a process. Obviously, we're talking about encapsulation, whether it's liposomal, mycelials, whatever you want to do with it. There's all this different science that has to kind of go into it. Although it's been figured out and solved in many ways, there's still obviously probably going to be better and newer technology coming out, because I'm a huge fan of innovation always. At the end of the day, though, we've had challenges. So this isn't typical. I thought I was going to be able to get it done for $500,000. By the end of this, before we generate a single dollar, we're probably going to be around 1.4 million. 1.2 to 1.4 million is probably where we're going to end up by the time we launch. There's lots of stuff involved. There's bottling lines. There's obviously any delay, you're still paying payroll, you're still paying rent, you're still paying all this other stuff, operating costs that don't add anything to your revenue line on, until you launch. So there's a lot of that frustration from me. It's my money, so it's hard, but but I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. This is exactly what I should be doing right now. And the team that we have today is top notch. These people have been in the industry for 5+ years. There are people on my team that have various backgrounds. My director of finance does like these wonderful, she can negotiate the crap out of things and save me money. And my director of operations can make sure everything's on time all the time. And it's just been an amazing experience up to this point, but it's a very costly endeavor and it is not for the faint-hearted. If I had to do it again, I'd still do it this way. I would bootstrap because I'd rather give equity to employees than to investors. And so all my employees are getting equity in the company as we move forward, there's different equity structures, but pre-launch, I'm gifting people equity into the company.
And I would argue it's probably more expensive than it needs to be relative to other beverages, because you probably have to be in a licensed space, which is probably not that big. So you have to make compromises on equipment. And there's not an existing infrastructure, right? If you're a beer company or a wine company, you phone up the other one and say, hey, I want to make this thing on your equipment. That doesn't exist either. So you've got to do it all yourself. And yeah, it's not a small expenditure.
Yeah, and having to scale all elements because of the lack of, the ability to kind of interoperate B2B. And that's just me kind of assuming that Massachusetts has similar regulations with THC in terms of, the fence that you guys have, which, yeah, that's a challenge. I mean, I can't even begin to think about what it would take if, we were sort of bound to only our state from a ingredient manufacturing standpoint. We would have to set it up in every single state. And
it is so. I was going to say, Arthur, you're a Kill Cliff, right? So that was a huge sticking point with me, and I don't mean to bring it up on this call, but I kind of have to. I started the hemp world. I only had to go to cannabis because our state doesn't allow you to put CBD in anything ingestible. I had CBD beverages 3 years ago, whatever it was, but I couldn't sell it. But my state was like, you get out of here with that stuff. You can't do anything with it. Our hemp program is all backwards. They're slowly getting along. I mean, starting to innovate on top of that, but not innovate, kind of at a snail's pace. But at the end of the day, I had to go into full cannabis, which means spending all that money just to get a beverage in market. And I'm still not even in market yet.
And Jason, I hear your frustration because I'm in the Massachusetts market. It took us 3 years. We were paying on 3 locations for 3 years. We had enough capital to build out all 3. By the time we were waiting for 3 years, we ran out of capital. So it is a big, serious problem. And I'm just saying, I'm proud of you for sticking it out. I'm proud that you getting your, the proper structure in place. And having the right team in place is not an easy endeavor to be in the Massachusetts market. So when I hear your hustle, when I hear your passion, it's amazing, man. Keep going. And congrats in advance.
Thank you so much, man. That means a lot coming from you. It really, really does.
No problem.
We've got our bottom of the hour break coming up in a few moments. And before we do, David, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
QuicksilverDeliverySystems.com. You can see the headlines of everything I've been talking about, from our technology and our ability to measure uptake and all that kind of stuff. Or you can email me at david.durkee@quicksilverscientific.com. And thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, we appreciate having you on. Arthur, how about you?
Yep, website is ecsbrands.com. ECS like endocannabinoid system, brands.com. My email is arthur@ecsbrands.com. ARTHUR@ecsbrands.com. And Great. Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
Great having you on. And everybody else, stick with us. We're going to be right back after this break here on the Green Rush.
All right.
Pro Cannabis Media programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry. And by Artery Pay, easy, cheap, fun, and legal, just like cannabis should be.
Difference is building a solution for that individual. Not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the costs low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
So I think there's one very important difference between me and most of my team members and other cannabis accounting firms, especially outsourced cannabis accounting firms. With a lot of the other firms, you're going to find bookkeepers or folks that were accountants for their entire career, but they were junior accountants. I've spent most of my career alongside CFOs at public companies with thousands of employees, public companies. So much of my career wasn't spent in the debits and credits. It was spent with the CFO, CEO, COO of large public companies, working on strategy, working on planning and big initiatives, working on projects such as mergers and integrations. So that high level experience, along with being able to do the debits and credits and having members of my team that also have fairly senior experience and also members of the team that are junior and can do the bookkeeping at a little bit lower cost than some of the people with the experience, gives our clients a much broader depth of experience than a lot of the other firms where you're hiring someone that is just a bookkeeper and can't help with the strategy side of it, or someone that's been an executive for a long time and can only help with the strategy but can't help with the hands-on.
And thanks for sticking with us, folks. We're back for the final segment of this Friday's Green Rush Show. We're trying to do a deep dive, all puns intended, into the beverage market so we can understand what's going on, what some of the challenges are, and what it actually takes to be successful as a cannabis beverage entrepreneur. For this segment, Aaron is staying with us, Jason's with us, and we're joined by Louis Goldstein, the Chief Marketing Officer of INSA. Louis, do you have your camera running?
I'm trying.
Okay.
But it seems when I disconnected from the docking station at work, it doesn't connect the camera back up. So give me a sec.
All right, well, we'll do that. We're going to start to jump into it. A little bit more discussion. So we would, Jason, how many brands do you think that a single market like Massachusetts would be able to support?
Yeah, without federal legalization, if we're just talking about Massachusetts specific, again, that's just what I know best.
Yep.
We're looking at, so I look at it from the craft brewer perspective, and I know Saka, Aaron, you're obviously in wine, but like when you think from the craft brewer perspective, how many craft brewers are in Massachusetts? If the rules were loosened up enough that we had that many stores, there's simple math you can kind of do with this, right? It's like, how many package stores are there? How many craft breweries are there? we're talking, at some point maybe in 2023, I kind of agree with Aaron, like the growth of this. We're probably going to see 20 beverages, in the market by 2023. But there's room for us all. I mean, there's an appetite for it today, but it's only going to grow.
I think I just would actually want to add on to that. Where I really see the bottleneck for the number of brands is what you're talking about manufacturing. In California, just this is a parallel example, and you're still going to see this in Massachusetts too. What really limited the number of brands that could be on the market was who had manufacturing that was capable of even producing a beverage. And then as soon as you had anyone who was doing a co-packing facility come online or willing to do that, that really exploded the number that was out there. All of a sudden you go overnight from 3 to 15 within a year, and continuing to go up from there.
Yeah, and we always trail a little bit behind California. We used to trail a lot, but we've kind of caught up a little bit through all this advanced innovation that's coming through. But yeah, when you get something like a big space station coming online, and all of a sudden you've got 20 more brands show up. Yeah, it's huge. And I know a few of the I've looked at a few of the different co-packers in California, and I'm trying to get them to Massachusetts because it's expensive to do it yourself. I just said it's $1.4 million at the end of the day is probably what we're going to do, and we're bootstrapped, and so that hurts. So yeah, but I feel like it's a limit on the manufacturing, but it's a limit on the regulations. I mean, it's just everything is just so limited. You have to dot your I's, cross your T's at every little step, and a lot of it's about diversion, which is kind of like that old scare tactic, right? It's like, we can't have it in the kids' hands and stuff like that. Like, nobody's giving your kids weed. You know what I mean? Who's doing that? Anyways, I can go on about that stuff, but it's just on the regulatory side, we're going to get smarter eventually in Massachusetts, and they're going to be more permissible, but it takes time, like anything. And so it's a long-term play for us, and it's a long-term play for anybody who's serious in the market.
So what do you think about, I believe the company name, Jason, is Wink, the company that's coming into the state, and they will produce, you come up with your recipe, and as long as you got the license, they bring in a canning operation in an 18-wheeler, and they produce your product for you, then they leave.
That is a tricky situation. So we've internally analyzed that a little bit. We don't know where that falls on the regulatory side. I know that it's an interesting play. A canning line going, I don't know where does did the THC cross outside of the facility, come back in? It just gets really, really hairy, right? So whatever they're doing, apparently the compliance team, whoever approved all that stuff, said it was good and above board. And so we're not going to question any of that moving forward. However, since it's not really if you're trying to establish a brand in Massachusetts, I feel like you have to be a Massachusetts brand. And so if you're taking an 18-wheeler into Massachusetts one day and then driving to, say, Illinois or, some other legal state, you're eventually are you providing enough marketing support in Massachusetts, for the dispensaries who are trying to get people into their dispensaries and their retail locations? Are you providing that value add of marketing and branding to get people into the store to buy this stuff? That's where I really question it. And so if they're providing all of that support, we actually did just see them at the Cannabis Wedding Expo that happened over the weekend. So they are providing some support there, but it's a tricky situation to be in. And I think a lot of people are trying to take advantage of the hype that's coming up right now. And some people are doing it successfully and some people just can't scale, right? So we're in the business of scaling, and that's our biggest thing right now. And so we'll be, by scale, the number 2 after a month after we launch, because we're going to have almost the same amount of capacity on day one as Levia.
I'll just to add in about the mobile canning and the co-packers coming in the state. We've explored the mobile canning, and it sounds like a fantastic idea, but just as was mentioned, how you're going to get that on your property, How are you going to get the right loading docks? How are you going to unload all of that stuff? And actually the cost of mobile canning really doesn't make it that advantageous for a long-term large beverage operation. And so I think it is potentially a way for some small production to start off, but for any volume, a mobile canning, I don't think is going to be the answer. And the large co-packers coming into the state, it's really going to take someone who's going to invest a lot of money and potentially not see the returns very early on. So I've talked to some co-packers that do a lot of the beverages for the alcoholic companies, the sparkling beverages, and they're starting to, for the first time, get into it in California. But they're using a facility that's making the majority of their money off of sparkling beverages from the large brewers. So I still think there's a number of years where it's going to be licensees in states like Massachusetts that decide to make an investment in beverages, and whether they decide to do co-packing or not, will determine whether other smaller players can get in. But it's still a startup mode, and I don't see it coming out of that for 3 to 5 years. And I guess federal decriminalization may change that, but the bigger brewers, they're not going to immediately know how to get into cannabis production. They're not going to have a license. And they're not going to understand the distribution system because it doesn't fit with their current 3-tier distribution system. So it's not going to be a slam dunk for Budweiser or Boston Beer or whoever. The minute there's federal decriminalization to figure out how to market THC beverages, they're going to be trying to figure it out themselves.
So, Louis, now that you got your video up, let's take a quick moment. Tell us about your role at INSA and tell us about the company.
So, sorry for the camera troubles. I should have followed your instructions. Tried to get on 10 minutes early, but I'm a rule breaker, I guess, or something. I'm the CMO at INSA, and we're a multi-state operator that's vertically integrated in Massachusetts. In Pennsylvania, we cultivate and have a lab, but don't own retail. And in Florida, we're building out our vertically integrated operations as we speak, and we'll launch next year. And my background has been in beverages, starting at Sam Adams when they were very small, and the only people were Sam Adams, Anchor Steam, and Sierra Nevada. And then working for Dr. Pepper Snapple Group, and then Organic Valley, and a whole different kind of beverages. So we are growing in mass, and we're selling some of the better beverages we have in the state of Mass now, and seeing a lot of really good traction and repeat purchase and interest in those beverages. But there are some good ones, and there are some that really taste horrible. And some of those are from the same company. And it's really just now sparkling beverages. So again, if you look at the beverage, if you look at how craft brews grew up, they each had a few lagers, a few ales, and then they started to do some seasonals, and then it exploded over a period. No one ever expected it to be like. I think in the cannabis beverage space, I think there is a huge demand for people to have THC and CBD in formats that are more acceptable to our culture as cannabis begins to be destigmatized. It's not okay to bring cannabis in a flower format or in some other formats to a pool party where there are kids, or even where there aren't kids yet. So a beverage is going to be a great option and is a great option, but we're only at the infancy of the formats, the taste profiles, and the consistency of product that consumers will demand.
How many beverage manufacturers or beverage brands in Massachusetts are you dealing with right now, or stocking?
We're stocking 3, and there are
Okay.
probably a total of 7 or 8. And those 3 are, let's just say, from my days working for Sam Adams, I feel like when I was at Sam Adams, I was much more focused on the customer than I feel like the current cannabis beverages are acting in a way that I think is a short-term strategy as opposed to a long-term strategy, if that makes sense. But that's this
Makes
business.
sense to me, Lewis. 100% makes sense to me. I'm on the same page with that one. It is really hard to balance, just to counter that briefly. It's really hard to balance that when you're, and we were just talking about this, Aaron, it's a long-term play. If you're going to be in this for a long time, you got to plan for a long term here. It's hard because since it takes a year plus 18 months in some cases just to get your brand in market, like you're constantly chomping at the bit being like, okay, am I going to do all this brand development? Like all the stuff we're doing and we've done, that is leading up to the success that we hope we're going to have at launch. A lot of companies are doing the short term, like, let's get it out there and people are going to buy it. That's the same fallacy that people fell into when it came to the large MSOs that were coming in and just growing as much as possible and saying like, people were just going to buy it, so let's just keep on growing as much as possible, and then cut back on all the production or on the cultivation and take losses, right? And so I'm not going to speak too much about the public markets, et cetera, but like it is really hard to balance moving really, really fast like a rocket ship to try to get to launch because there's other brands popping up all the time now, especially in the Massachusetts market, versus really going through communication guidelines, brand guidelines, and really developing a full concept of what it really is. Although we've done a lot of that work, and I've got a really great team that's done a lot of this and has relied on people that have worked on Sam Adams products and stuff like that in the past. And we were trying to poach the best of the best. At the same time, you have to balance that with moving super fast in a bootstrapped 7-person company.
Yeah, there will be, the way I look at it is there are the brands that are looking to get in and make money. And those brands, it will not be long-term. Then there are brands, maybe there will people that will get into beverages that aren't just looking to sell their company in 12 months and who are trying to build a business and be in it for 5, 10, 15 years and do what that takes with relationship building, with supporting the customer. But right now, people like getting in, trying to build their distribution, not giving any discounts, not giving much support. And that to me, from my standpoint, is an opportunity for organizations to get in and build a long-term brand and a long-term relationship, because those other brands will fall off, in my opinion.
Can I ask, just because, so one of the really interesting struggles we see when you were talking about, trying to serve the customer, right? I'm very curious how this is in Massachusetts, because over here in California, we have this sort of tug and pull between, are you trying to sell to the majority of customers now, where what a lot of people seem to be looking for are higher dose beverages. They won't buy something that's under 10 milligrams a can, and some of the most popular stuff is actually 100 milligrams a unit. If I drank an entire one of those, I would be floored for probably 1 or 2 days and not showing up to work at all. Some people can do that, and that's wonderful. But then I've got these new consumers who are having cannabis again for the first time in 20 years, or maybe the first time ever. And where they seem to do really well, at least if they can get to them and try them, is those microdose beverages. where you're only having 2.5 milligrams or something. Are you guys seeing the same thing over there?
I think we're seeing 5 milligrams is the most you can have for rec in Massachusetts. I haven't seen anyone. You can do higher dosages for medical only. No one has tried to do that yet. There are some microdose beverages, 2.5 milligrams and some CBD, and those are doing well. So I think there's both today. And to be honest with you, I don't even believe necessarily that everyone has the dosing down right, and whether anyone has long-term stability testing done like we had to do in past lives. So I'm not totally sure that there is the QA behind some of the beverages out there that the dosing is truly right if the product just sat on the shelf for 2 or 3 months or 4 months or whatever. So I think we have a lot of room to grow, even to build consumer trust that what they're getting is what they think they're getting. But that's part of a growing industry as well.
Well, that's super important. But I've also personally found, I guess, like one of the biggest threats I see to this entire category is a bad consumer experience on that first trial, because that's something I think can slow this down another 5 years easily. Where to me, it's more probably that experience of getting too high that makes people scared of something and of doing it again.
Yeah, I think there's there are some people that have had bad experiences with the current beverages on the market in Massachusetts, and I don't know if it's themselves, but there are people that can handle dabbing that have had a Levia beverage and had a horrible experience. And it's hard for me to understand how, if they can dab, that 5 milligrams of THC in a beverage would give them a bad experience. Now, there's a lot of people that had great experience with Levia, and we sell a lot of it, so I don't want to disparage that. But I think there's something going on there. If that's happening, and I agree with you. I still think we're young enough that someone if has a bad experience, they'll try another one, but it won't be forever.
Louis, do you think so? In Massachusetts, we have rules. I think it's lifting to 110 milligrams in total per package, no more than, I believe it's 5 or 5.5 milligrams per serving. Do you think that that's going to continue to work with beverages, or do beverages need to have more than 5 milligrams because one can is a serving in order to get some real traction?
Well, if the idea is that beverages are meant to be like beer or like alcoholic seltzers, then I think 5 milligrams is the right amount, and 2.5 milligrams is the right amount for people to be able to enjoy 3, 4, or 5. In the same way that beer, for the most part, there are some higher alcoholic beers that people can handle, but they don't go to 15 or 20% alcohol. If you want high alcohol like that, you're going to drink bourbon and drink shots of tequila. Right. So I think in the long term that THC beverages are going to be like beer or alcoholic seltzers in that they're a controlled amount where you can enjoy multiple servings, multiple cans, and not be to a point where you're not able to converse with other people and have a good time. Or maybe there'll be products out there like malt liquor or something that some people will want, and the whole goal is to just drink a 40 and fall on the ground. But I don't think that's the that's where the volume will be. I don't think that's where the stronger brands will be. I think that'll be a fringe.
So you think the bulk of the market will stay with the lower levels of THC per can?
I think that's where the volume in cannabis will be. There will be a high-end person that just wants to get totally that wants this end of an experience, but I don't think that's where volume is in a market. And I think if you look at other products that provide an effect like alcohol, beer, or liquor, it's moderation, enjoyment in moderation that is the volume. And on the hot, it's a much lower amount of people that are using the product to get to a point of passing out.
So I would like to add a little bit to that, because if there wasn't a requirement on vertical integration in the medical market, I would also be in the medical market. And here's why. I constantly feel I'm out there. I'm in places out there all the time with people who use or consume, I should say. And there is a need for a higher dose. We're not that company today, because we're on the low dose side. We're 3 milligrams, right? We're not trying to go to 5. Again, like I said before, we're not trying to get a person on a rocket ship on the first drink. It's a sessionable experience. In fact, Lewis, before I gave up alcohol for good, I was looking for session beers. I didn't want to have a 7% beer anymore. I was like, why do I want to have one beer and then have water the rest of the night? I can't drive home after that. You know what I mean? So I was always on the lookout for session beers. And now I'm a huge fan of Athletic Brews. And they even know that at this point. I've tagged them on so many posts at this point. I love Athletic Brews. I love non-alcoholic beer. In fact, I use cannabis with non-alcoholic beer all the time. With that said, on the medical side, I would. And the reason why is because I get approached a lot from people who do use it for very much medical purposes, who I've supplied tons of random little, treats and stuff like that to people who are just like looking for a specific type. And so what I'm always looking for is, and I actually just had a conversation with an oncologist 3 days ago, and they were like, we can't wait to tell people about your beverages because they're going to love it. And I'm like, listen, we're low dose. And if somebody really needs it for their cancer, I don't have that product today. But if it wasn't for the vertical integration restrictions on the medical market, I would be 100% trying to serve that market as well, because cancer is something I'm super, super passionate about. And David, you know this too. I'm in the PMC every year, right? Raising money for cancer.
Yep. I was there yesterday and I'm going to be there on Monday.
The question I would have though is, and I agree with you on the medical side, is someone going to choose a beverage or our tinctures, or syringes? I just don't know if beverages, how big a market on the medical side. It may be something that is done for certain consumers. I think tinctures, to be honest with you, is a much more effective way and a much quicker activation for a medical consumer to get the relief they need. But
Lewis, I've got to say, actually, I think that is really a question of consistency in technology right now. I mean, what I've seen in my time in beverages and where this can really go is that well-made beverages can be way more consistent on the actual experience and faster onset than tinctures. But again, it's a question of how you're doing it and how you're making it and what you're using there. But the ability to, consistently bypass the whole path of going into your liver and things like that, and the things you can do with beverage to create just that consistent experience time over time.
Right.
I don't think any other category can do that.
Right.
All right. Well, folks, we're coming to the end of the Green Rush for this week. We're at 5:59. So before we wrap this show up, we're going to go around real quick. Aaron, give us a plug for the Cannabis Beverage Association and tell us how people can find information about it, how they can find members if they're interested in products, and more importantly, how can they join?
Please check us out at cannabisbeverageassociation.org, or feel free to just shoot me an email personally, and I'm more than happy to chat with you and connect you. My email is Aaron, AARON, at houseofsaka.com.
Great. Thank you. Lewis, where do they find you? Where does INSA have stores, and where will they find the beverage cooler?
INSA.com, and we have stores across Massachusetts, as well as whether they're our own dispensaries or whether we wholesale. In Pennsylvania, you can find us in almost every dispensary in Pennsylvania. The beverages in Massachusetts, everything's behind the counter. Someday maybe it won't be, but you can check out our online menus. We offer Levia, High Five, Can Trip today, and as the other great ones become available, we'll bring them on as well.
Great.
Thank you.
No, it was great to have you. And Jason, it's always good to connect with you. You're always running around at 100 miles an hour, so you're hard to catch. It's like trying to chase a butterfly during the summertime. But when do you think you're going to be launched, and how can consumers find your products?
So we already have relationships. So basically we're having our PPLI on Tuesday. We are an MBE, so we actually do get some priority status for getting this done. So, the CCC probably will take a vacation in December like they usually do. So we'll probably be bottles in hand in January, maybe February at the latest due to some delays. But for the most part, you'll be able to find our beverages in about 20 stores, I believe we're launching with at this point. We're trying to keep it somewhat small. The appetite is there, but the problem is we're trying to keep it really tight. So, but you can find us in stores. We have a newsletter, we have a list, we've got everything, and I'm everywhere. I'm in the YouTube chat, I'm everywhere. So it doesn't matter, you'll find me. And but at the same time, you can email me direct. It's just Jason at getgoodfeels.com, representing the Good Feels Cannabis Sparkling Beverage.
Sounds great. Thank you to all the guests, to the ones who are here, as well as the prior panels. There's been another episode of the Green Rush. We do this every Friday, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern, talk about the business of cannabis. Hope to see you next week. And remember, even though Jimmy's not here, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly.
Coming up on We Talk News this week, there is movement on the cannabis legalization front as a Republican congressional representative introduces a legalization bill. Is this the political shift that can impact reform at the federal level? We'll hear from the NCIA lead lobbyist, Michael Correia.
Next week, it looks like on Monday, she's going to be introducing her bill.
Plus, the celebrity push towards legalization starts to organize with Sarah Silverman and Seth Rogen teaming up with Headcount and CannabisInCommon.org.
More than 2/3 of us agree cannabis should be legalized.
New Jersey will start to take applications for adult use licenses, and the Harvest Cup competition is in Worcester, Massachusetts, the cannabis capital of the Bay State. All on We Talk News next. Pro Cannabis Media programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry. And by Artery Pay, easy, cheap, fun, and legal, just like cannabis should be.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. There is movement on the federal cannabis reform front, and amazingly, it comes from the Republican side of the aisle in Congress. House Republican Nancy Mace, a freshman rep from South Carolina, has introduced a federal legalization bill that features many elements from the Senate version of legalization, courtesy of our friends Senator Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, and Ron Wyden. Now, the big question is it the fact that a Republican is penning this bill? Does it make it more passable by both houses of Congress? And who better to talk about this development than our friend at the NCIA, the Director of Government Relations, Michael Correia.
It's Representative Nancy Mace, a freshman from South Carolina.
Yep.
And you would think, well, why would a person from South Carolina care about this issue? It's not like South Carolina is leading the country in reform. It's an issue that is just personally a priority to her. And so she's a freshman. When she came to Congress, she said she wanted to focus on 3 priority issues. This was one of the 3, cannabis reform. So, hey, give her props as a Republican from the South and from South Carolina for taking on this issue. I want more members of that. It makes me happy. So that's sort of the background on her. Her staff has really been interested in this issue. They've got a lot of influence in our regulatory paper that we put out a couple years ago. They really appreciated that. They've been talking to a lot of reform groups. And so there's that. But another bit of background. So when the MORE Act passed, if you remember the debate, a lot of Republicans came out and said, I'm not supportive of this. And they just gave a thumbs down. Right. But then no one ever said, what are you supportive of? How far are you willing to go? Mm-hmm. And so after the MORE Act, when I was talking to some Republican offices, Representative Dave Joyce being one of them, Nancy Bates being another, I always thought, wow, there should be an alternative. There should be an alternative Republican bill to MORE, because I do believe there are a lot of Republicans out there. And Greg Walden was a former Republican from Oregon, and he said he couldn't support the MORE Act, but he felt, and he retired last year, he felt that there could be Republican support for descheduling legalization of cannabis that didn't go as far as the MORE Act to address some of these concerns and issues. And so I've always thought, well, let's keep the conversation going. Let's have an alternative, and let's put, the legislation where people's mouth is and see if there is support for something like this. And let's be honest, if you are a federal official and you still think this should be federally illegal, well, then you're a dinosaur. You're out of touch with 70% of the voters in this country. Mm-hmm. And so, but let's be honest, maybe some Republicans, you could have simple descheduling, decriminalizing, kicking it to the federal. And then you have, a total regulatory approach where it legalizes in all 50 states. There's like a from A to Z on how far you can go on the federal reform, on how comfortable Republicans are going to be. And so, that's my long way to get around to next week. It looks like on Monday, she's going to be introducing her bill. It's out there. A couple of reporters have seen it. They posted it. The plan is basically introduce it, and they're facilitating comments from stakeholders right now. Ours, NCIA right now, is in the process of going through it, giving a summary of it, and then giving our comments back. Mm-hmm. And then when she introduces it, it isn't just a nothing bill. I think it's going to be a very important bill because 1, it's a Republican, 2, it's a freshman, 3, it's from South Carolina, and it gets a discussion going. And I mentioned Dave Joyce; he has his bill out there, and this is a Nancy Mace Republican bill. These are 2 options for Republicans to think about if they are not willing to go as far as the MORE Act. And so that's to put it all into summary of sort of where we're at and why I think it's big. And then the last part is, we know history. I don't think history is kind to first-term presidents in Congress. And you saw what happened in Virginia and New Jersey a couple of days ago in the election. There's a high probability that the House and Senate switch, and it's a Republican legislature in 2023. If that's the case, then Nancy Mace's bill is going to take on a bigger priority, and Dave Joyce's bill is going to take on a bigger priority. So right now, we can gain some co-sponsors, but I think this is more of she's getting her thoughts out there, and let's have a discussion.
There's another thing that happened this week with a couple of celebrities. Seth Rogen and Sarah Silverman now have some nonprofits, and they're trying to galvanize the troops, if you will, their followers, to put pressure on other congressional leaders to move cannabis legalization forward. Are you optimistic that every little bit helps? Is that how you have to look at that effort?
Well, Congress isn't eventually going to move until this is just a slam dunk with the American public. And the more times they hear the beating of the drum coming back from the states, it makes it easier for them to vote on something like this. And you mentioned, a couple of the stars coming out. I want to mention, I think it was 24 governors sent a letter to Congress this past week to say, hey, pass the Safe Banking Act in defense appropriations budget bill. And so, 24 governors. The reason why I'm saying this is it's just showing you how this is getting throughout America, how there is this broad acceptance on something like this. It takes time. It makes my life easier. I'd rather have 50 governors behind a bill, but 24 is better than, you remember back in the day when we would get 1 or 2 or 3 governors supporting something. And so now it's a lot more, and it's a little more wind at our sails, and it doesn't hurt.
There you go. And every little effort's going to help. That's the whole point of this. Isn't going to just be a slam dunk. You still have a president in the Oval Office who perhaps, even though he said he supports it, we haven't seen a lot of movement, and it's been frustrating, I think, not only for lobbyists, but also for other advocates out there, that they're not getting what they'd like to get out of the White House as far as cannabis reform goes. But if there's this kind of initiative with the other side of the aisle, perhaps we might see something on his desk in the next year or two.
So if something gets on his desk, it's going to be Democratic led, but it is a lot easier. And we've done the math before, anything getting out of the Senate is going to need 60 votes,
right?
60 votes. Okay. You get 60 votes. You're needing 10 to 15 Republicans on something like that. And the only way 10 or 15 Republican senators are going to get on something like that is if there's a lot more broad support on this issue. And it's just not there for Republicans just yet. I'll be honest with you. I don't think it's just there for Joe Biden. It seems like he goes an inch forward and 2 steps back on something like this, where I think they could be doing a lot more. And I think they're not doing as much as they could be behind the scenes. And I think you look at cannabis stocks, they have been probably half of what they were in January, because the reality is the moneyed interests probably don't see cannabis reform on the short-term horizon happening, just the realities of DC coming in. And so I always mention this, we're never going to go backwards. We're going to get to it legalization, but is it a straight line that takes a year? Does it take a year? Does it take 3 years, or it takes 5 more years, another administration, another Congress? But I've been doing this 8 years. I plan to be doing it, until we get this over the finish line. And so I'm really happy a Republican introduced a bill. We're looking through it. There's a lot of good provisions in it. The excise tax of under 4%, that's wonderful compared to, say, the Chuck Schumer bill, which is in the high 20s or something like that. And so whatever legislation is out there, and what cannabis industry is fighting for, is making sure people participate in this industry, and the gray market, the illicit market, slowly dissipates and goes away. And people, small business entrepreneurs, want to participate in this business. If all we're doing is fighting so 5 big companies gobble up the entire industry, is that the world we want to live in? That's not the world I want to live in. And we can do what we can to make sure that small business entrepreneurship is still thriving. And there isn't, NCIA is fighting for that. And I want to make sure, most people, you and others who've been doing this for a year, are fighting for the same thing.
A reminder, Michael will be joining Green Rush Live at 4 p.m. on Friday with host David Rabinovitz. On Friday on the PCM TV network. Of course, that's when you'll find Green Rush Live every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Now, for the rest of the news from the D.C. area, here's Vote Pro Podcast, Phil Adams. Phil?
Hi, this is Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, here with the Weed Talk News DC report. A group of U.S. senators sent a letter to President Biden this week, once again urging him to use his presidential authority to grant mass clemency to non-violent cannabis offenders. The letter, signed by Senators Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey of Massachusetts and Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, notes that the criminalization of cannabis is, quote, increasingly out of step with the views of the American public. The Constitution grants the president the power to pardon individuals as well as broad classes of Americans to correct widespread injustices. Last February, 37 members of Congress sent a similar letter to Biden. No action has been taken by the administration. House members from both parties are calling on leadership to use budgetary restrictions to protect states where cannabis is legal from federal interference. In a letter to the leaders of the House Appropriations Committee, a group of 4 House members, 3 Democrats and 1 Republican, are asking that language be included in the final spending bill for fiscal year 2022, prohibiting the Justice Department from using federal funds to circumvent duly enacted state cannabis laws. The letter states, quote, "We believe that the federal government should not interfere with the will of the voters of these states." A change in leadership in Virginia will not mean the end of cannabis retail sales in the Commonwealth. In fact, members of the new Republican majority in the House of Delegates are considering speeding up the timeline for recreational sales, set to begin in 2024. Adult use legalization went into effect on July 1st of this year, allowing possession of up to 1 ounce of cannabis by adults 21 and older. It did not, however, legalize buying and selling of cannabis products. Incoming Republican House Leader Todd Gilbert said, quote, "We need to fix that, or all we'll have is a black market." Republican Governor-elect Glenn Youngkin pledged during the campaign that he will not seek to repeal legalization. That's the Weed Talk news from inside the Beltway. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
This is, of course, the week of Veterans Day, when we honor and remember many who served our country in the military. A quick shout out to our favorite veteran, Stephen Mandilli from Uxbridge, who works as a co-host on our Joint Venture Co. show with Ann Brum. Please get well soon. Stephen, we miss you, big guy. Our Missouri report is from a friend of Missouri veterans, Brandon Jones, who tells us about another state that has now banned hemp-derived Delta-8, while also postponing new rules about promotional events in the cannabis industry in that show-me state. Here's Brandon's report this week.
Hey everybody, I'm Brandon Jones, a distribution maven, Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Today I'm at Mogro Solutions here in Kansas City, Missouri for a Veterans Day celebration. We're actually getting a lot of education out to the veteran community, and one of the biggest things they did today was they gave an entire grow kit to a veteran. So Top Shelf is a local podcast. It's Top Shelf with Big V and Zach. They do a lot of education on the Missouri cannabis scene and help a lot of veterans in the community. Big V himself was a veteran. So they actually gave an entire grow kit to a gentleman today and set him up so that he can have his own medicine. The second report today comes out of DHSS. It has to deal with 2 main issues on a draft. The first is clones. So at this point in time, Missouri cannot sell clones at any dispensaries, but this is up for change. There are a couple weird stipulations in the law, though. First of all, is that they must be kept in the vaults. They must be labeled by the person and must be picked up within 24 hours of the actual estimated delivery date. If they don't pick it up, the dispensary must dispose of the clone. The second is that they are thinking about banning Delta-8 products in all dispensaries here in Missouri. So these 2 things are up for draft and should be voted on soon. So I'm Brandon Jones with Distribution Maven for Weed Talk News, Missouri Report. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great weekend.
The Garden State of New Jersey has announced that they'll be accepting applicants for adult use licenses next month. That state hopes to open their first adult use dispensaries next year, about 6 months ahead of where their big brother neighbor, New York, is at this particular time. New York continues to dominate the news when it comes to merger and acquisitions, and that's why we depend on the Green Market Report's Deborah Borchardt to keep us all up to speed on the world of the publicly traded cannabis stocks and the multi-state operators who continue to dictate the direction of this new industry. Here's Deborah's Green Market Report for this week.
This is your business update from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News. We are in the thick of earnings season with almost 20 different cannabis companies delivering their numbers this week. Still, there's a couple of huge deals we've got to go over. Spring Big announced it was going public through the Tuatara SPAC. The post-transaction valuation is listed at $500 million, and it is being suggested that the company will have $200 million in cash after the closing. But we think it is worth noting that Spring Big is only on track to report $24 million in revenues for 2021, so that's a pretty frothy valuation. Curaleaf Holdings is buying Western state operator Trike Companies, known for its Reef dispensaries, in a deal valued at approximately $286 million. The acquisition is expected to close in the second half of 2021, and Curaleaf said it is going to be immediately accretive. Trike is expected to deliver nearly $110 million in full year 2021 revenue. And turning in one of the best earnings reports this week was Green Thumb Industries. Third quarter revenue at Green Thumb increased 48% to $233.7 million. GTI's same-store sales growth was 14%, and that's on a base of 48 stores, driven primarily by increased transactions. And you can head over to the Green Market Report for more earnings details. I'm Deborah Borchardt, and this has been your Weed Talk News Business Update.
It's the 5th annual Harvest Cup at the DCU Center in Worcester, Massachusetts this weekend. This is the yearly competition for who grows the best weed in the Bay State. There are about a dozen categories for best sativa, indica, resin, hash, and many other categories. And I talked with the Harvest Cup Scott Brodsky on Wednesday's LinkedIn Live in the Weeds. And after a year off because of COVID, they are all looking forward to getting back to face-to-face networking and selling, of course.
We are all consumers of this incredible plant, and it really is. It's a consumer show. I mean, when people ask, what kind of show are you? Well, I say first, we're a cup. We're a cannabis cup. That's who we are. We're a competition. We're just fortunate enough to have the DCU Center as a venue where we can actually host it, and that just lends itself to some incredible things like the trade show and the expo that we are able to put on with the speakers, the presentations, and having all these incredible vendors and sponsors coming out to support us and really, be a part of the community and bring everybody together. So it really is.
With the rest of the cannabis news from the Bay State, here's Ron Marshalsea. Ron?
I'm Ron Marshalsea with the Massachusetts Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Governor Charlie Baker announced Wednesday that he would be refiling legislation to set the ground rules for enforcing laws that ban driving while under the influence of marijuana in Massachusetts. The governor said his bill would revoke someone's license for 6 months if they are suspected of operating under the influence of marijuana and refuse to take a chemical test for impairment. The bill would also prohibit drivers from having loose or unsealed packages of marijuana in their cars, similar to the ban on open containers of alcohol in vehicles. A recent bill filed in the House by a state rep and 2 senators would legalize health insurance coverage for medical marijuana products and related clinical visits in Massachusetts. Dr. Ryan Zachlin, who works in the Mass General Brigham Network, said in a Joint Committee on Financial Services hearing that patients don't come to him for marijuana. Instead, they come to him for pain, anxiety, and insomnia, and he also added how cost is among the biggest barriers to treatment that he sees with his patients. However, since cannabis is still considered a Schedule I drug by the Drug Enforcement Administration and not yet FDA approved, Massachusetts does not allow health insurers to pay for medical marijuana. And finally, Clear Cannabis Incorporated, master licensor of cannabis distillate brand The Clear, announced today its entrance into the Massachusetts cannabis market through a partnership with the Bay State-based Green Gold Group. This will be their first venture on the East Coast, and Seth Wiggins, president of CCI, was quoted as saying, "Massachusetts is one of the most robust and mature recreational markets on the East Coast, which made it an easy choice. We found the perfect partner with Green Gold Group, and we are thrilled to be entering the Massachusetts marketplace. This officially places the Clear brand coast to coast and formalizes our national presence." The company's award-winning line of vape cartridge concentrates will soon be available in 35 to 40 retail locations throughout the Commonwealth. That's this week's Massachusetts Cannabis Report. For Weed Talk News, I'm Ron Marshalsea.
It's been a real battle in South Dakota for the rights of patients to have access to medical marijuana in that state, and that was a program that was actually voted on and approved by a landslide in the last election. Finally, it looks like that medical program will get launched in that state. Now, you might remember that voters approved both medical and adult use at the ballot box in South Dakota in November last year, but their governor, Kristi Noem, is still fighting the adult use initiative in the courts while the legislature there tries to figure out if they can launch an adult use program. No such problem in Vermont, where that state continues to move towards their first official sale of adult use cannabis products. Green Nurse Jessie Lynn Dolan has our Vermont Cannabis Report. Jessie Lynn?
I'm Jessie Lynn Dolan from Nurse Grown Organics and Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. Milton resident Kyle Lamoth was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment after he pled guilty to the possession of over 1,300 pounds of cannabis, almost 1,600 kilograms of THC-infused products, 121,000 in currency, and 4 loaded firearms. Lamoth will also have to pay a $20,000 fine and be subject to 3 years of supervision after his release. In the last few weeks, a number of towns, Jamaica, Woodstock, and now Londonderry, have voted in favor of allowing cannabis retail in their community. However, Ludlow voted down retail. Look for more votes come town meeting day in March. With those votes likely in mind, the Cannabis Control Board has asked lawmakers to come up with new financial incentives to get towns to opt in to cannabis retail in their communities. Cannabis Control Board member Julie Hulberd noted that towns could run into unexpected expenses hosting a retail store, and that sharing a portion of Vermont's cannabis excise tax with communities could help defray those costs. Hulberd said sharing tax revenue allows local government to cover their costs associated with retail stores being within their borders, and it may encourage municipalities to opt in to allowing retailers to come into their borders. The legislator will be picking up this issue and other cannabis-related proposals when they reconvene in January. That's the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
It's called Cannabis in Common, and it's Seth Rogen's latest attempt at normalization and legalization of cannabis. This week, he joined Sarah Silverman on Headcount with videos designed to ask the public to call on their federal representatives in the states to put an end to prohibition in this country and legalize cannabis finally. Interestingly, U.S. multi-state operators like Curaleaf, Kronos, and Canopy Growth from Canada have all pledged support behind the efforts of Rogen and Silverman to galvanize the public. Right now, 68% of Americans support legalization at the federal level, according to the latest polls. Perhaps some messages from celebrities and their constituents will motivate our politicians to learn about this plant once and for all. One guy who has always been in favor of legalization is attorney Thomas Howard out of Illinois. He hosts the popular Cannabis Legalization News. He has our Illinois report for Weed Talk News.
Hello, I'm Tom Howard from Cannabis Legalization News, and I'm here with Weed Talk News to discuss Illinois from the week that is November 11th, 2021. And in the big story, Green Thumb Industries has exploded when it comes to its stock. It is up about 16% today because they blew the socks off of their earnings. It's quite easy to do when there's been no new cultivation licenses given out by the state of Illinois since July, actually, but those entrants aren't coming onto the market for at least another, and this was from a reputable source that is another MSO operator in the industry, 12 to 18 months. So 12 to 18 months from now is 4 to 6 quarters. Looks like Green Thumb Industries, the ticker for that one is GTBIF. It may still go up, but you know how stocks are. Sometimes you don't get to only make money by printing it and then by selling securities. Sometimes you raise money, and that is what Philo did, another Chicago-based cannabis ancillary. It is a cannabis marketing and compliance software company. They raised another $40 million to fund growth, mergers and acquisitions, and attract talent. The deal comes just 7 months after they had raised $30 million, and now they've raised $100 million in capital since August of 2020. Why would you need to raise so much capital? probably because you're losing money, but it's a private company, so we really can't inspect its books, unlike Green Thumb Industries, where you can. So we have to read tea leaves when you have a private company that's raising money like that. However, you're publicly traded, you actually have to report on a quarterly basis, as you may or may not be aware. And then finally, Illinois craft growers are struggling to get out of the gate, even though that they now have licenses. For example, Ambrose Jackson, a CEO of Helios Labs, shout out to him. Hopefully I'll see him here in the city really soon. Ambrose Jackson said, this was an unintended consequence of legislation that limited our production initially to 5,000 square feet of flowering canopy. For craft growers, licenses winners that are in the process of securing facilities and maybe redesigning floor plans, and it makes sense to build out a facility capable of operating at the maximum 1,400 square feet of flowering canopy. The problem is that it becomes cost prohibitive for some, and that is true. You see, the 5,000 square foot flowering canopy is the smallest license type in the state of Illinois. It equates approximately to a Class C license in Michigan, which is their largest license type. Class C license has 2,000 plants. A craft grower license doesn't have a limit on plants, just the flowering canopy size at 4 square feet per plant. That would be approximately 1,250 plants in flower. And so that would be approximately a Class C license, because not all your plants would be in flower, you see. You might have still some in veg powering flower rooms. And if you really enjoyed all these types of things, you should check me out at cannabisindustrylawyer.com. My name is Tom. You can also find me on Instagram at Cannabis Industry Lawyer. Back to you, Jimmy.
Ohio is starting to talk about expanding its already existing medical marijuana program by adding many ailments to the list of diagnoses to qualify. They include migraines, opioid use disorder, and arthritis. A Republican state senator there named Stephen Huffman has introduced a bill that expands that program, while signatures are being collected in Ohio to get adult use on the ballot for 2022. No such issues in California, where Christopher Smith has been covering the cannabis scene out there for years. Here's Christopher's report this week for American Cannabis Report and for Weed Talk News. Christopher?
Thanks, Jimmy. Here's this week's California Roundup for Weed Talk News. She's half legacy, half legend, and you might recognize her predicament and wonder, if Kimberly Cargile has her parachute on, should I get ready to jump too? Kimberly Cargile. She's a 20-year California cannabis veteran. Having started working in the fields in 2001, she's volunteered for every major cannabis organization nationwide. She's helped guide policy, and now she's the owner of 9 cannabis businesses. Well, they're getting crushed by MSO competition and by falling prices, so she's got her head outside the plane looking for a soft landing. Now, if you're worried about your own place in the industry, just remember that California's been flying this plane for 25 years. You probably got a little more time to make your fortune before you need to pull your own ripcord. News from Hollywood is that celebrities are taking the fight for legal cannabis to Congress. Seth Rogen and Sarah Silverman, 2 stoners, 1 owner, founded Cannabis in Common, which says if we don't make a change soon, we are settling for laws that disproportionately land people of color in prison. We're leaving hundreds of thousands of jobs on the table and giving up tax revenue that can go toward education and other community investments. Nearly 50 companies have signed on as partners. They want federal legalization, but let's hope that they do not want federal regulation. What a mess that would be. Corruption, extortion, and theft. Oh my! In Northern California, Mendocino County, or Mendo, as the locals say, is giving coppers yet another black eye. The lawsuit alleges hundreds of acts of extortion, theft, and robbery of marijuana, guns, and cash by law enforcement officials from at least 4 separate agencies. The Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, Mendocino County District Attorney's Office, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Rohnert Park Police Department. Mendocino Shakedown sounds like a Grateful Dead song, but the lyric "Sheriff's on My Trail" was already taken by a song called "Friend of the Devil." Did Jerry Garcia have a crystal bong? And I'm Christopher Smith from the American Cannabis Report, sending peace and love from Cannabis Heaven, California, and Mendocino too, for Weed Talk News.
Hello again. This is the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News. Let's begin. A grand dinner was held at the Radisson Hotel Tuesday night featuring an educational seminar for House representatives and their staff members. Jamie Lowell acted as MC. Presentations were made by Joe Sullivan, Mitzi Ruddock, Representative Cynthia Johnson, Amy Carter, Casson Coleman, and myself. This educational seminar comes as just the latest in a series of actions taken by patient, caregiver, and adult use community in late 2021 in response to the introduction of a bill package which proposes to radically alter the nature of the medical marijuana laws in Michigan. Those events included Rally the Allies in Ypsilanti, the September 15th rally at the Capitol Building, Lobby Day 2021, and the 3 regulatory reform committee hearings in which a large patient caregiver contingent was present. It was testimony and questions asked during the first of those hearings where the need to educate lawmakers on the nature of cannabis and the details of the law became apparent. Michigan cannabis retailers on the Indiana border say more than half of their customers are from south of the dividing line, according to a new report from WANE. One dispensary manager estimates her out-of-state customer base as 60%. Another was quoted as saying more than half of their sales goes to Hoosiers, who often come in and buy their full limit of 15 concentrate grams or 2.5 ounces of flower. The report also references cannabis tourism too, as one expert discussed couples coming to Michigan for a date night, which involves an overnight stay in a local hotel, a fancy dinner, and a trip to a local retailer. More ways in which cannabis consumers help to pump up the economies of the communities which allow them. Final story today. Online news source greenstate.com revealed the answer to the months-old question, which Michigan city has the most cannabis retailers in it? Well, that depends on how you're measuring the most, says author Angela Mulca. Now, by sheer numbers, it's Ann Arbor with 24. However, Ann Arbor has a population of about 120,000. Consider instead Bay City. With a population of only 20,000, they have 22 adult use retailers. Now, that's one retailer for every 1,500 city residents. And then there's tiny but friendly Kalkaska, with one retailer for every 346 residents. Other cities with large numbers of cannabis retailers include Battle Creek with 20, Lansing with 16, Kalamazoo at 14, and then Big Rapids, Muskegon, and Grand Rapids, each with 12. And that's it for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News.
And finally tonight, once again, a true story about an effort by a 19-year-old Alabama man who thought it would be a good idea to try to break into prison to deliver cigarettes and cannabis to some friends in jail. Now, it was around 2 a.m. that Jadakis McKinney was spotted by a security camera cutting through the fence at the Troy, Alabama Pike County Jail. His own phone was used to locate him after he cut through 2 fences. Needless to say, he got caught, arrested in the parking lot, and charged with criminal trespassing, promoting prison contraband, and yes, of course, cannabis possession. I guess the good news is he's now reunited with his friends in jail. They just don't have any weed or cigarettes to celebrate with. You know, you just can't make this stuff up. That's Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. And Elena Pinto returns to the anchor desk next week.